Okay, class, we're about to start section 7.5, solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. The advantage to the completing the square method for solving a quadratic equation is that ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. The disadvantage to the completing the square method is that it requires a lot of messy steps and is quite a bit to remember. Also, if a is not equal to 1, it is much more difficult. Wouldn't it be nice if there was one formula that would work for any quadratic equation? The solutions of a quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, are given by, and we have this formula here, where we would substitute in for b, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And we would substitute in the values for a, b, and c. Now it says solve by using the quadratic formula and then factoring. And then by factoring, compare your results. Okay, now, the first thing we know is consistent is our a, b, and c. A here is 1, b is 3, and c is negative 10. So we'll use the quadratic formula. So we have x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, we have x is equal to the opposite of b is 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times a is 1 and times c is negative 10 all over 2 times 1. So we have x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, it'll be 9, negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times the negative 10 is positive 40. And that's all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. So x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 49 all over 2. Now, we know this will become negative 3 plus or minus 7 all over 2 because the square root of 49 is 7. So now, we would take this value here and we will have basically x is equal to negative 3 plus 7 over 2. And x is equal to negative 3 minus 7 over 2. And we know this would equal to 2, and this would equal to negative 5. So our final answer here would be x is 2, comma, negative 5. This is our two answers for this first problem here. Now, what I'm going to do is this here. We did the quadratic formula. Now we're going to do factoring. Now, of course, we know x squared plus 3x minus 10. We have our a, b, and c listed here. And we know that we would do a times c, which would give us negative 10. And we'll do the factors of negative 10. We'll do 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. And since a times c is negative, but b is positive, that means that the smaller numbers would be negative. So the two numbers we will use here is negative 2 and 5. So we have x squared minus 2x plus 5x minus 10 equals 0. We group the first two. We can factor out an x, and we have x minus 2. We'll group the second two values here, which will factor out a positive 5, and we have x minus 2. So we have x plus 5 in one parenthesis, and x minus 2 in the other parenthesis. And we'll set both of these parentheses separately equal to 0. So we'll subtract 5 on both sides here, and x is negative 5. We'll add 2 on both sides here, and x is 2. So our final answer would be exactly the same as it was for using a quadratic formula. Now it says for both factoring and the quadratic formula, you must set the equations equal to 0. Always try factoring first, unless instructed otherwise, because it is often easier. Now, one of the reasons why it's easier is because you're used to factoring. You've been factoring for quite a while now, from your last class up to this class, or even from high school. The quadratic formula takes a little while longer because you have to substitute in for all of those different variables. So now it says solve using the quadratic formula. Simplify completely. Okay, first of all, we have to make this equation equal 0. So we will add 2 on both sides. So we add x squared plus 5x plus 2 equals 0. Now, our next step, we would do our A, B, and C. A we know is 1, B is 5, and C is 2. Now we will put that in a quadratic formula. So we have x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we have x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b, which is 5 squared, minus 4 times a is 1 and c is 2. All over 2 times a is 1. So we have x is equal to negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared is 25. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times 2 is a minus 8. All over 2 times 1 is 2. Now, we will have negative 5 plus or minus 25 minus 8 is 17, so it's the square root of 17 all over 2. And this is our final answer. Now we go here to B. Now again, we must have everything on the left-hand side equal to 0. Well, the main thing is we have to make sure that our x squared is still positive. So we're going to subtract 4x and 1 on both sides. So we add 2x squared minus 4x minus 1 equals 0. Now we could list our A, B, and C. A is 2, B is negative 4, and C is negative 1. Now we go through and we use this quadratic formula. So we add x is equal to, we do the opposite of b, which is negative 4, plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4. Our a is 2, and our c is negative 1. All over 2 times a, which would be 2 times 2. So we will have x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared is 16. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times a negative 1 is positive 8. All over 2 times 2 is 4. So we have x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 24 over 4. Now we know the square root of 24 has a perfect square in it. The highest perfect square in 24 is 4. So this would end up being 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 times the square root of 6 all over 4. So we have x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 is 2 times the square root of 6 all over 4. Now 4, 2, and 4, they all have actually 2 in common. We could divide all of these by 2. So we will have 2 plus or minus the square root of 6 all over 2. And this is our final answer. Now we scroll down here to C. Now with C, if you notice here, we have these fractions here. And most people don't like dealing with fractions, so let's get rid of those fractions. The common denominator is 6, 3, and 2 is 6. So we'll multiply everything by 6 over 1, and that will leave us 5x squared plus 4x is equal to 3. So we have to subtract 3 on both sides. So we have 5x squared plus 4x minus 3 equals 0. Our a is 5, our b is 4, and our c is negative 3. So we will put it in the quadratic equation. So we had an opposite. We know b is 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4. Our a is 5, and our c is negative 3. All over 2 times 5, because a is 5. Now, we will have x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. Negative 4 times 5 is negative 20, times a negative 3 is a positive 60, all over 10. Now, we have negative 16 plus 60, which we know would give us 76. And we know 76 has a perfect square in it, and this perfect square is positive 4. So it'll be negative 4 plus or minus square root of 4 times the square root of 19 all over 10. So we would end up here with x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus 2 square root 19 all over 10. Now, negative 4, 10, and 2 all has 2 in common. So our final answer would be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 19 all over 5. And that is the final answer for C. Now we have to go back up here to D. Now we need to multiply these two parentheses out, which we know would end up with 2x squared minus 5x minus 3 is equal to negative 18. We will add 18 on both sides. We will add 2x squared minus 5x plus 15 equals 0. Now let me draw a little line here to separate this. Okay, so now we have our a, b, and c. Our a is 2, our b is negative 5, and our c is 15. So we will have x is equal to the opposite of negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times a is 2 and c is 15. All over 2 times a, which would be 2 times 2. So we have x is equal to positive 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times 15 will give us a negative 120 all over 2 times 2 is 4. So we will have x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 120 will give you the square root of negative 95 all over 4. Now, first of all, we know that I can come out of this negative, and 95 does not have a perfect square in it. So our final answer here will be 5 plus or minus I square root of 95 all over 4. And that will be the final answer. Now we will scroll down to the next page, or scroll to the next page. It says method. We have factoring, square root, completing the square, and quadratic formula. Now we have to tell the limitations of each. So now we look at the first method, the factoring method. Okay, the limitation is, first of all, you must have a equals 1 for easy factoring, so it can equal 0. Okay, number 2, the square root. Remember, we must have this parentheses squared, and it must equal to a number, like we basically said here. Okay, well, what we said earlier in this exercise. It says completing a square all the time, but ugly, use only as directed. And then the quadratic formula, it will work all the time, and even if a is not equal to 1. So just to let you all know is this here. The best formula to use, I would say, of all of these, first of all, factoring, because you're used to factoring. Factoring is typically the better formula to use if you could use that. Then I would possibly myself probably look at the square root, then the quadratic formula. How we use the completed